Tearing himself away from the geology exam he was studying for, Shale Stevens looked out the small, dirty window of his office. There they were, the iconic ivy-covered walls that had come to symbolize the pinnacle of academic science in America. There are some people who would kill to work with a view like this, he thought to himself. An assistant professor position at an Ivy League school, good pay, beautiful surroundings, surrounded by young students and some of the smartest minds in the world. What's not to like? If they only knew, he shook his head wryly, returning to his work. Shale had held similarly rosy views when he'd gotten the job offer from the university. Now, almost 2 years later, he was deeply disappointed. To begin with, the salary offered to him looked very attractive until he discovered how expensive it was to live in an Ivy League city. The high cost of living combined with the student loan payment schedule made it difficult for Shale to lead any sort of normal life. The only thing that saved him was that by accepting a job, he was able to negotiate a place for his wife, Sylvia. She had moved into the vice chancellor's office as a special assistant, and the extra income it brought in allowed the couple to enjoy some luxuries, such as a 2-bedroom apartment closer to the university. But money wasn't the only source of Shale's discontent. The university evaluated its professors by their teaching, research, and service to the university. For Shale, these requirements took the form of teaching a full course each semester while serving as an advisor to several students. At the same time, he was required to conduct groundbreaking research, publish in prestigious peer-reviewed journals, and serve on several university committees in his spare time. As a result of all these requirements, Shale found himself working more than 60 hours a week each month of the academic year. Summer vacation provided no respite. Because the academic year was consumed with teaching, advising, and committee work, summer was Shale's only chance to do research and writing. One day, when he tallied up all the hours he had worked, Shale was horrified to discover he was making less than $30 an hour. I would have been in a better financial position if I had gone to work right out of college instead of going to graduate school, he thought bitterly. But he had always been fascinated by the origins and development of the planet, and he loved being able to share that fascination with others. He sighed and turned again to the exam lying before him. The year would soon be over, and he wanted to prepare for the final exam. He knew the subject thoroughly, of course, but since the department had introduced a new text, Shale had to make sure he reflected everything on the final exam. This was another of Shale's favorite problems. The textbook the department required was written by Dr. Gray, the chairman of the geology department. That was fair enough. The chairman was a recognized authority in the field. But what annoyed Shale was that Gray produced a new edition every other year. The changes from one edition to the next were minimal, but they ensured that students couldn't buy used texts, and that guaranteed Professor Gray extra royalty income. It also meant that Shale had to redesign his lectures and exams to fit the new text, adding yet another task to his already long list. A knock on his office door interrupted Shale's concentration. Surprised, he glanced at the calendar and was horrified to see that he had a student conference scheduled. Sighing to himself, he said, "Come in." The door to his tiny office opened, and a pretty blonde woman peeked out from around the corner. "Is this a good time for our meeting, Professor Stevens?" she asked politely in her girlish voice. It wasn't a good time in Shale's opinion, but being available to meet with students was an important part of his duties, so he held back his irritation and invited the girl in. As she settled in, he tried to remember why Taylor Poindexter had wanted to meet with him today. Shale looked at Taylor with mixed feelings. She was undoubtedly an attractive girl, and he knew she had to be pretty smart, or she would never have been accepted into the university. But in terms of his class, she was a bad student who spent most of her time tweeting or on her Facebook page. No wonder, he thought, that she was failing classes. "What can I do for you, Miss Poindexter?" he asked politely, though he was sure that was exactly what she wanted. Many students chose geology to take the science exam because they thought it would be easier than chemistry, biology, or physics. Shale was annoyed to learn that Introduction to Geology was commonly referred to as rocks for jocks in the student body. Usually, students didn't learn the truth until early in the semester. The physical history of the planet is a difficult and demanding subject. Of course, Taylor quickly moved on to listing the problems with her grades in his classes and self-justifications for her performance. Then, she got to the heart of the reason for her visit. "Professor Stevens, is there anything I can do to improve my grade?" she asked, looking him over with a glare. "I really can't afford to fail your course." Shale suppressed his impatience and said softly, "Really, Miss Poindexter, the best thing you can do is to study a little harder for your exams. I know geology is not your passion, but it deserves more attention than you have given it so far." "But there's so much to learn, and besides, final exams won't help my previous grades. Isn't there some special project I could take on? Maybe something I could do for an extra grade?" she asked slyly. "Are you sure I can't do something that will convince you to give me a better grade for your course, Professor?" she purred to him. As Shale fidgeted awkwardly in his chair, trying to think of an answer, the door to his office swung open, and two young women jumped out into the doorway. Shale looked up and saw his assistant and her roommate smirking. "Aren't we supposed to be discussing the lesson plan now, Professor Stevens?" the blonde asked slyly. "What? Oh yes, Annika, you're right, I forgot," Shale muttered gratefully. Turning to the girl sitting on the couch in front of him, he hurriedly said, "I'm sorry, Miss Poindexter, but I have a conflict right now. We're going to have to reschedule." Taylor stood up abruptly and looked at the two women standing in the doorway. "It's okay, Professor, but I'd still like to do something for extra credit, so let me know." She walked past the two women, clearly unhappy that her plans had been interrupted. When she left, Shale breathed a huge sigh of relief. "Good thing you two showed up in time. That woman was trying to seduce me into giving her a better grade. Never before has a female student tried to bribe me like that." Now both women started laughing loudly, and Shale stared at them incredulously. "Okay," he demanded. "What's so funny?" Annika Mortensen, blonde and his assistant, smiled broadly. "Okay, we'll come clean. I noticed on your calendar that Taylor had an appointment for today, so I figured you needed to be rescued. She has a reputation for trying to oversleep the entire faculty." Mosa Pienaar, Annika's roommate, chimed in. "Yeah, and the talk on campus is that she's already had success with several professors. That's why we decided you needed to be rescued." "Anyway, you two set me up," Shale said, folding his arms in mock anger. "The least you could have done was warn me about her in advance." "What? And miss the confused look on your face like that?" Mosa asked cheerfully. "Not to mention the bulge on your pants," she added with a smirk. Shale looked down at himself and quickly sat down at his desk in embarrassment. Trying to hide his embarrassment, he hastily continued. "Still, I'm glad you two showed up exactly when you did. It's scary to come face to face with an ogre," he said with a smirk. When the laughter subsided, his expression became more serious. "Unless we really need to discuss something, you two get out of here and let me finish learning this stuff. I need to finish and then get out of here in time to get home and get cleaned up. There's a faculty reception at the president's mansion tonight, and I don't want to be late for it." Smiling and waving, the two women departed, continuing to giggle with each other, and Shale couldn't help but chuckle as they walked away. Annika had been assigned to him at the beginning of the school year, and she had been much more helpful than he had expected. She was teaching Shale's introductory geology lab while working on her doctoral dissertation, as well as helping him with grading papers and advising some of the students. Shale found her bright, talented, and disposable. And he had to admit, with her long blonde hair and tall, slender figure, she was very pleasant to look at. All in all, Shale concluded, her fiancé back home was a very fortunate man. Shale was also interested in observing the relationship between Annika and Mosa, her roommate. Due to the shortage of graduate student housing, they happened to share a room. Other than the fact that both were extremely attractive and intelligent, they had almost nothing in common. Annika's platinum blonde hair hinted that she was Swedish and originally from Minnesota. In contrast, Mosa, who was working toward a master's degree in business administration, was originally from South Africa. With her hazel-brown complexion, short-cropped ebony-colored hair, and more graceful figure, she formed a stark contrast to Annika. Despite their differences, however, they had become as close as sisters, and they were seen together so often that they were known as Salt and Pepper on campus. Pushing thoughts of the two girls aside, Shale turned back to the test. "I have to be on time today," he told himself sternly. "Sylvia will flog me if we're late for the president's appointment." As he was packing up his laptop to head home in half an hour, his phone beeped, reporting an incoming message. As he read it, he sighed. It was a message from Sylvia. "Waiting for you at the mansion. The provost needs me for work. I'll be home late. S." As he drove home, a gloomy mood rose inside him. When he arrived at the university, negotiating a position for Sylvia seemed like a stroke of luck. A job for her in the provost's office meant extra money for small luxuries. They wouldn't have been able to rely on his salary alone because of student debt. Besides, Shale figured it wouldn't hurt his wife to make acquaintances in an administration of such high rank. If the president was the chief executive officer of the university, the provost was the chief operating officer, a powerful figure with direct oversight of all academic support units, in charge of resource allocation and heading the university budget committee. His influence might have proved useful when it came time to evaluate Shale's candidacy for tenure. But things didn't work out the way Shale expected. Not only was his own workload much heavier than he had expected, but Sylvia's work became increasingly time-consuming after the first year. At first, the provost used her talent as a photographer. Later, he began to use her organizational skills. As a result, her work schedule became longer and more irregular this year, and she was often involved in evening and weekend activities. Lately, it seemed to Sheila that she and Sylvia communicated with each other via text and email more often than in person. But to be honest with himself, it wasn't just their hectic lives that bothered Sheil. He felt like his wife was becoming increasingly cold towards him, especially during the last semester. The easy affection that had characterized the early years of their marriage had all but disappeared. Now Shale sensed Sylvia's growing dissatisfaction with their way of life in general, and his in particular. It seemed obvious to him that they were drifting apart, and lately he had begun to wonder if someone else might be the catalyst for the change. Such doubts were having a devastating effect on his usually cheerful outlook. When he got home, the apartment was empty, but upon entering their bedroom, he found the suit, tie, and white shirt he should have worn there. "I'm not a child," he scolded under his breath. "I know what to wear to events like this." Nevertheless, to avoid an argument, he put on the clothes Sylvia had chosen and went to the reception. To provide a suitable venue for the reception of dignitaries and potential donors, the university had provided the president with a luxurious mansion in the city's most prestigious neighborhood. As Shale pulled up to the curb, the student acting as valet hurriedly took the keys from him and parked the car. Shale couldn't help but notice how the young man turned up his nose as he looked at Shale's older model sedan. Shale walked quickly through the mansion, stopping only to grab an appetizer and a glass of white wine from the serving man. Then he stepped through the French doors onto a huge terrace decorated with paper lanterns. Making his way through the crowd of faculty members and their spouses, he went in search of Sylvia. When the crowd parted for a moment, he saw that she was sitting across from him, engaged in a passionate conversation with Eric Solvay, the vice-rector of the university. Shale felt the acid rise in his stomach when he noticed Solvay's hand on Sylvia's waist. Then Sylvia noticed him and said something to her boss. When the provost turned around and saw Shale approaching, Solvay hurriedly backed away from Sylvia and extended his hand to Shale, who reluctantly shook it. "Very glad you could come here today, Shale," the provost said smoothly. "Sylvia has told me many good things about you and your research." Shale glanced at Sylvia, but she kept her expression neutral. He returned his attention to the provost and thanked him for the implied compliment. Finished with the formalities, the provost continued easily. "I hope you won't mind if I take your wife away for a while tonight. She has proved so capable that I don't know what I would do without her." With no further apology, the provost turned and led Sylvia away, and Shale was left standing still, trying to think of an appropriate response. Glancing over her shoulder, she gave Shale another puzzled look before continuing her conversation with Solvay. This brief exchange seemed to crystallize all of Shale's resentments and suspicions. Sylvia had not said a word to him, had not even acknowledged his presence. Instead, Shale thought, she focused all her attention on the man who was her boss and unknown to her. He twisted angrily in his seat and nearly ran head-on into the host and hostess of the evening, Magnus Jefferson, the university president, and his wife Margaret. Jefferson had already made academic history by becoming, at 43, one of the youngest men ever to hold the presidency of a major university. He was tall, with thick dark hair accentuated by gray at his temples, which made him even more distinguished. If a casting director ever wanted to play a university president in a movie, he'd pick someone who looked like Magnus Jefferson, Shale thought with annoyance. The president's wife was what he called beautiful. Margaret was also the daughter of one of the university's biggest donors. There was gossip among the faculty that their marriage was more like a union of royalty than a love story between a guy and a girl. For a moment, Shale froze, embarrassed by his accident and not knowing what to say. But Jefferson avoided the awkwardness by smoothly taking Shale's hand. "Dr. Stevens," said the president warmly, "I'm very glad you could come today. The head of the geology department has provided me with glowing reviews of your work." Shale was surprised that the president recognized him, and highly doubted that he had received such a report from him. The last time Shale had met with the head of his faculty, the good chairman had trouble remembering his name. Nevertheless, Shale modestly thanked the president for his words, and then turned politely to his wife. "It's awfully kind of you and the president to invite us all, Mrs. Jefferson. The mansion looks beautiful tonight." The first lady of the university only nodded graciously, but Jefferson couldn't allow silence to reign. "It's the least we can do," the president exclaimed fervently. "As I've said many times, this university is only as strong as the quality of the faculty." Shale recalled the president using the same phrase in another speech when talking about alumni, so the president's words didn't impress him. But he pushed those heretical thoughts aside, smiled, and thanked the couple once again. As soon as the president turned to introduce his wife to another guest, Shale made his escape. Quickly making his way through the crowd, he walked out the door and asked the valet to pick up his car. On the way to his apartment, Shale stopped at a fast food joint and bought a sandwich to take home for dinner. As he sat down at the dinner table, Shale asked himself, "How come things are so bad between me and Sylvia?" His thoughts went back to the beginning of their relationship. He remembered that he had met Sylvia when he had been asked to give a lecture to the local chapter of the Geological Society in his hometown. Shale knew that it was not his oratorical skills that had won him the dubious honor, but the fact that he had just returned from Iceland and had brought back dozens of breathtaking photographs of the country's many volcanoes. Shale didn't remember the lecture well, but he did remember the photographer from the student newspaper who wanted to interview him after the lecture was over. He never found out why Sylvia had attracted him, but there was no doubt that the slender dark-haired girl had completely charmed him. He later learned that he had caught Sylvia after a failed long-term relationship, but by then, the only thing he cared about was winning her over for good. They settled in together while he finished his doctoral studies. If winning Sylvia was Shale's first big success, passing his dissertation was his second. The paper, Variable Rates of Diastrophism in the Late Archean and Proterozoic, created a minor furor in the stuffy fraternity of geologists. His study of the causes of irregular pulses in the movement of Earth's tectonic plates was groundbreaking. So much so that his doctoral advisor insisted that he be listed as a co-author when he was published. Normally, Shale would have been outraged at his advisor's undeserved credit, but his resentment was forgotten when he received an offer of a position at an Ivy League university. Such an offer was tantamount to winning the lottery. Shale had proposed to Sylvia the same night he got the contract, and she had squealed with happiness when she accepted. At first, moving to university seemed like a great adventure, the next big step in their pursuit of happiness. But these illusions were soon shattered by the unexpectedly high cost of living in a new city, the long hours of work Shale required, and the difficulties they encountered in making new friends in the university community. As time went on, Sylvia's resentment began to grow, and there was little Shale could do to reassure her, especially since he too was dealing with his own frustration. Even as she complained about her husband's workload, Sylvia's new job began to take up more and more of her time. By the beginning of their second year at university, their work schedules had so reduced the amount of time they had together that at times they were more like roommates than husband and wife. Their sex life began to suffer as well, and by the beginning of their second semester, it had gone from frequent to occasional to virtually non-existent. When was the last time that happened? Asked Shale to himself. In addition to his own dissatisfaction, Shale began to wonder if Sylvia might be satisfying her needs in some other way. She had always had a high libido, and that thought only made Shale more paranoid. Coming out of his despondency, he checked his cell phone. Even though the faculty reception was supposed to end at 9 p.m., he saw that it was almost midnight, and Sylvia still wasn't home. Shale remembered how the provost had put his arm around Sylvia's waist, and that memory only fanned the fire of his jealousy. At that moment, he heard the key rattle in the lock. Since he was sitting at the kitchen table, Sylvia hadn't noticed him when she entered, and he took the opportunity to scrutinize his wife, looking for any sign that she was doing anything other than work. She was dressed attractively, of course, but he had to admit that he saw nothing about her that would suggest any inappropriate behavior. Nevertheless, he couldn't resist voicing his jealousy. "The reception ended hours ago. What have you been doing all this time?" he demanded, startling her. She flinched, then turned to face him. "I didn't expect to catch you on your feet," she replied coldly, folding her arms and turning to face him. "You're usually sound asleep at this time. But in answer to your question, I will say that I was working with Eric. He had a lot to do after the reception, and he needed my help." "Seems to me you always have something to keep Eric busy these days," Shale grumbled. "You're never home anymore." "You say that," she snapped angrily. "When you're not in class, you're always checking papers or going to a committee meeting. You work longer hours than I do. Besides, you were the one who wanted me to take the job with Eric." Shale felt the argument slipping away from him, and his frustration was building. "It's not about me," he replied. "It's about you not being home at off hours. It's the fact that I never know where you are or when you'll be home. And when you're home, it's Eric this and Eric that." Before he could stop himself, he demanded, "Are you having an affair with the provost?" For a moment, Shale saw an expression on her face that was unfamiliar to him, but then she broke into a contemptuous laugh. Then she began to pace back and forth and finally stopped to look at him. "Where do you want to be in 5 years?" she asked suddenly. "What?" Shale hissed, caught off guard. "It's very simple," she said caustically. "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" Confused by the change of subject, Shale's orderly mind automatically tried to think through the problem and come up with an answer. "Well, in 5 years I expect to be promoted to the rank of professor, which would mean real job security for us. I also expect to be promoted to the rank of assistant professor, which means my salary will be a nice raise as well. We'll bring in so much money that you won't have to work anymore if you don't want to. We'll even be able to start a family," he added hopefully. But Sylvia's only response was a curve of her lips that hinted at a chuckle. "Have you ever thought about becoming an administrator?" she asked. "What, no. Why would I want to do that? Being a professor is what I've been striving for all my life. I love geology and I love research. Why would I give that up for an administrative job?" he asked, genuinely perplexed. "Well, for one thing, it would be much more prestigious," she replied. "You'd be working with the real driving forces of the world, not stuck all day in a lecture hall or dusty lab." "I don't see where you're going with this, Sylvia," Shale said. "Teaching at the university is something we've always talked about. It's what we've worked together for. I thought you wanted that kind of life too." "I know the last year or two haven't been easy for us, but things will get better," he added, trying to put optimism in his voice. She stared at him in silence for a few moments. Then she sighed and said, "Never mind. I'm tired, and I have to get up early for work tomorrow. I'm off to bed." With those words, she turned and walked down the hallway toward their bedroom, leaving Shale standing still in bewilderment. What does all this mean? He asked himself as he cleaned up the kitchen. When he finished and changed, Sylvia was already in bed, pulling the covers over herself. Shale climbed into bed beside her and turned out the light. He didn't even try to touch her. It was obvious to him how she would react. When he woke up the next morning, Sylvia was already gone. Since he only had afternoon classes that day, he had time to eat breakfast before heading to the university. As he started going through the papers at his desk, the conversation he had with Sylvia the night before kept popping up in his mind. What was that nonsense about my goals and expectations? He wondered. And where did that line about working in administration come from? As he thought back on it, he suddenly realized that Sylvia had never given him a straight answer to the question that had started the whole conversation. She never denied that she was having an affair, he thought suspiciously. At that moment, Mosa peeked out from around the corner. Professor Stevens, may I interrupt you? Annika asked me to bring you the lab report you requested. Shale looked up, and the sight of the pretty young woman lifted his spirits for a moment. He invited her in. Thank you, Mosa. I really appreciate it. Suddenly, he was overcome with worry. Is Annika all right? She's not sick, is she? In love, Mosa replied with a wide grin. When I left her, she was on the phone with her mother, carefully planning the details of her wedding. It's a wonder that girl can do anything else right now. Well, let her enjoy it while she can, he replied. The honeymoon won't last forever. Uh-oh, said Mose quickly. Do I detect in that remark any discontent on the Stevens home front? Shale mentally censured himself for letting his misgivings creep into the conversation. The last thing he wanted to do was involve Mose and Annika in his personal problems, so he quickly tried to brush off her concerns. No, it's fine. I was just trying to make an unfortunate joke about how quickly time passes. Anyway, you're very kind to do that for her and for me. Mosa left the subject. All right, Professor. I'll leave you out of the way and you can get back to work. Have a good day. And with a wave of her hand and a smile, she departed. He managed to get through the afternoon class without incident, but the somber mood returned in full force when he got back to the office. He needed to go over a draft of the Dean's Committee on the status of adjuncts report, but there was no way he could concentrate. So when Perry Ryan stopped by and offered him a beer, Shale happily put the report aside. The two of them found a quiet table at a tavern near campus and ordered a mug each. Shale was glad of Perry's company and wanted to know what the older man thought of his problems. Perry was also an assistant professor in the geology department, but he was a few years older than Shale. Although they might have been rivals for tenure at some point, Perry welcomed the new man and had been friendly since the day Shale had come to the university. In fact, Shale thought, Perry was probably his only friend on the faculty. Both men had young and attractive wives, and both professors had tried a couple of times to forge friendships between the pair. But for some reason, Sylvia didn't hit it off with Camille, Perry's wife, and since their wives set the social agenda, the only time Shale and Perry got together was for a beer or two. Shale wondered if part of the problem lay in the fact that Camille was an adjunct professor. He had never really thought about adjuncts, but after serving on the Dean's Committee, he began to understand why there might be problems. Although the word adjunct professor sounded impressive, and although 3/4 of the university's faculty were adjuncts, they were little better than indentured servants. The university paid them the equivalent of minimum wage for each course they taught, and Shale was amazed to learn that they received no benefits. They were like highly educated temporary workers with no status or job security. If too few students enrolled in a course an adjunct was teaching, it could be canceled on the first day of class, and the adjunct would be unemployed overnight. Shale had heard of adjuncts at other universities who had to get food stamps to survive. Considering how poorly adjuncts were treated and how low they were valued, Shale thought it was no surprise that Camille might feel uncomfortable socializing with other professors and their wives. But today, Shale had other concerns. After a little pointless chatter, Shale leaned closer to his friend and said, Listen, Perry, I've got a situation at home, and I need some advice. With those words, he began to voice all his frustrations and concerns about Sylvia. I think she may be having an affair with the provost, he concluded. Perry looked around anxiously. Don't say things like that where other people can hear, he said in a low voice. This campus is full of faculty and students who like to gossip, and every one of them is armed with a camera phone and a Facebook or Twitter page. Allegations like this could spread like wildfire and cause a lot of trouble. He took a sip of beer. Besides, it seems unlikely to me that Sylvia is acting behind your back. From what you've said, it's obvious that you guys are going through some bad times in your marriage. But every marriage goes through that. In any case, all you have are doubts and unproven suspicions. If you accuse Sylvia of cheating, you'll only drive a wedge between the two of you that will be very difficult to heal. But let's assume you're right. Let's assume that Sylvia is cheating on you. Is it really such a big problem? Wouldn't it be better to turn a blind eye to it than to destroy your marriage? If it comes to divorce, your finances will take a hell of a hit. Wouldn't it be better to keep a low profile until she gets out of it than to pay years of alimony until she remarries? Shale looked at him in amazement. Are you saying I should just ignore it and pretend it didn't happen? That's exactly what I'm saying, Perry replied calmly. It's just sex. What's the big deal? Shale aghast. I guess I'm just not wired that way, Perry. Sylvia and I made some vows to each other when we got married, and I kept them, even though I had opportunities, he said, remembering Taylor Poindexter. I expect Sylvia to hold hers back too. The conversation went on in circles from there, and finally both men went their separate ways without changing a single opinion. When Shale returned home, he was surprised to find that Sylvia was already there. Even more surprising was the fact that she already had dinner ready in the oven. For the first time in weeks, the two of them enjoyed a home-cooked meal and spent time talking about various campus events and activities. It's just like it used to be, Shale thought to herself. After the two of them cleaned up the dishes, Shale went to work to make up for the time spent with Perry at the tavern. When he finally finished his report for the dean's committee, the lights in the living room were already out. But when he returned to the bedroom, Sylvia was already waiting for him. As soon as he entered, she got out of bed and walked over to him. He tried to ask what was going on, but she said, "No questions." She then pushed him back on the bed, and they got down to it. After a while, when he cleaned himself up and went back to bed, she was already asleep. As he snuggled up next to her, a feeling of happy tiredness came over him. As he fell asleep, he remembered that this was how he'd felt when they'd first gotten married. The next morning, Shale was in a cheerful mood. Maybe Perry was right. I'm just paranoid about Sylvia, he told himself as he drove to work. His good mood had helped him get through the final exam he had to take for his senior geology class, and even the prospect of grading all the papers couldn't discourage him. He was just whistling to himself when Annika walked into his office. She stared at him for a moment, then grinned slyly. Looks like someone's having a hell of a lot of fun tonight. Shale was caught off guard by her comment and blushed. Annika laughed and said, Hey, don't be embarrassed. It's a good thing. Mosa told me you were in a bad mood yesterday, but I think things got better last night. No pun intended. To hide his embarrassment, Shale pretended to have a stern attitude toward her. So you two spend all your free time discussing me behind my back? Then it was Annika's turn to blush. Shale let her squirm for a few moments before changing the subject. Is there something you need to see, Annika? Grateful for the change of topic, she brought the final exam she planned to take in the lab class to his desk for him to look over. They chatted about the questions for a few minutes before Annika left for her next appointment. As she walked out the door, Shale once again thought about how lucky he was to have such a smart and capable assistant. He considered both her and her roommate friends, not just colleagues. In the afternoon, the committee that reviewed the status of adjuncts at the university met. As Shale regretfully learned, his fellow professors seemed to enjoy debating each proposal to death. Arguing with colleagues seemed to be their favorite sport. As a result, the meetings became endless, and it was almost impossible to come to an agreement. But as he listened to the endless debates, something happened that shook Shale to the core. One of the professors recommended a slight increase in the pay of all the adjuncts, and another immediately challenged him. "You're doing nothing more than throwing a bone to a hungry dog to keep it from barking," he said contemptuously. These words from the professor made Shale's stomach ache. "Is that what Sylvia did last night?" he thought nauseously. "Maybe she threw me a bone to distract me from what she was doing behind my back. That's probably why she didn't want me to make love to her. It was all for show." As he sat there pondering, his smartphone suddenly started vibrating. When he pulled it out, he saw that he had just received a message from Sylvia. "Working L82 night. Don't get up." As he stared at the screen, the text seemed to taunt him. If someone had asked him to summarize what had happened for the rest of the meeting, Shale wouldn't have had a clue. He sat there, immersed in emotions that changed from anger to sadness to misery and back again. When the meeting finally ended, he immediately headed back to the privacy of his office to try and make sense of what was going on. "I can't believe this is happening to me," he groaned as he sat in the darkened room. "If Sylvia isn't having an affair, she's acting like this. But how can I know for sure? She won't admit it, and I can't prove anything. I don't want to ruin my marriage if I'm wrong. Besides, a divorce would be a financial disaster. But if she's cheating on me, I'll never be able to look past it like Perry suggested." He shook his head disappointedly. "What am I supposed to do?" After fruitlessly circling the same mental path for a while, Shale's stomach reminded him that he hadn't eaten anything since lunch. He glanced at his phone and was surprised to find that it was late. Remembering that he wouldn't be able to fix anything at home quickly, he decided to allow himself the luxury of eating out. "Maybe I'll feel better if I'm amongst other people rather than constantly alone," he thought. He stopped by a pub frequented by students and sat down in a chair and ordered a burger and fries. Normally he tried to stick to a healthy diet, but in his current mood it seemed inappropriate. He was halfway through dinner when suddenly his phone rang, making him wince. He wondered hopefully if it was Sylvia calling, but the display showed an unknown number. When he answered, he didn't recognize Mosa's voice at first, and when he realized who it was, she was speaking so fast he could barely make out a word. "Mosa, Mosa, slow down. I can't understand you. What's wrong?" "It's Annika Scheel. She's hysterical. I've never seen her like this. You must come at once. I don't know what to do." "What's wrong, Mosa? Why is she hysterical?" he asked urgently, at the same time pulling out his wallet to pay for his food. "It's her fiancé," the girl replied in a frenzy. "He dumped her. He canceled the wedding. Annika is out of her mind. Please come." "Shit," he muttered under his breath. "Listen, Mosa, I'm at a pub near campus right now, so I'll be there in a few minutes. I'm on my way out. Hold on tight." Throwing the bill on the table, he jumped out of the pub, ran to his car, and hurried to the student dormitory. When he got off the elevator and knocked on the apartment door, Mosa must have been standing right there, because she opened right away. Shale was shocked at the appearance of Mosa. Her pretty face was contorted with fear, her eyes were red, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. It was obvious that she was highly distressed, almost panicked. He grabbed her shoulders to reassure her. "Where is Annika now?" he asked, and she pointed down the hallway to the closed bedroom door. "She locked the door and won't let me in," Mosa replied, panting. "Okay, before I go back in there, tell me what happened," Shale said, trying to keep his voice as calm as possible. "It was about half an hour ago," Mosa explained. "He called her on the phone. The son of a bitch told her he'd found someone else and the wedding was off. I heard Annika screaming and I ran over there. She was sobbing hysterically. She said her life was over and she wanted to die." "Okay, let me talk to her and try to calm her down." He let go of Mosa and started to walk down the hall, but Mosa grabbed his arm. "She's got a gun, Professor. I think she's going to kill herself." "Where did she get a gun?" he asked in horror. "She's had it for a long time," said Mosa. "Her father gave it to her for protection. Should I call the campus police or 911? Shale's stomach rumbled, and he felt his adrenaline levels spike, but he tried to remain calm. No, don't do that. An official record of a suicide attempt could ruin her future prospects, and I don't want that to happen if I can help it. Just take a seat over there, away from the road, and keep your cell phone handy, just in case. Mosa's eyes widened. She nodded and stepped back. As Shale walked to the bedroom door, he heard Annika sobbing and wailing. Just in case, he stood back up and knocked on the door. At first, nothing happened, but when he knocked again, this time more loudly, Annika sobbed, "Go away, leave me alone." "Annika, it's me, Professor Stevens. It's Shale. Annika, please let me in." The sobs turned to whimpers, and he heard footsteps approaching the door. The knob creaked, and then the footsteps moved away. Hearing nothing else, Shale gingerly tried the knob and, when it turned, slowly pushed the door open. Annika stood opposite him on the other side of the bed. In her hand was an automatic pistol, which she waved in his direction. "Who else is there?" she demanded. "There's no one here but me and Moss, Annika," he said soothingly. "You'd better put the gun down. You scared poor Mosa half to death." Her tears flowed again. "No, I won't. My life is over. Everything I've lived for is gone. I just want to die," she said, waving the gun recklessly. "Look, Annika, you can't kill yourself. There are too many people who need you and care about you." "Robert doesn't need me," she said, her voice growing harsher. "He must have cheated on me the whole time I was at university. I feel like such a fool." "No," Shale said, trying to keep his voice firm. "You're just lucky." At those words, she raised her head. "How can you call me lucky?" she shrieked angrily, and for a moment Shale thought she might shoot him. "You're lucky," he went on quickly, "because you found out what kind of man Robert really is. You're lucky you didn't marry him and find out the truth later. Believe me, Annika, finding it out later is much worse." Talking to the distraught girl, Shale scrutinized the gun she clutched in her hand. He noticed that it had a safety, and though it was hard to tell from the way she kept waving it around, it was hard to tell that she might have put it on the safety. If so, he hoped she was new enough to not realize it, and not smart enough to remove the safety with her thumb. Annika's cries grew even louder. "My life is ruined. All my dreams are gone. Now I have nothing to live for." "No," said Shale angrily. "That's not true, and you know it." The young woman was taken aback by his tone, and Shale continued. "You have people who love and need you, Annika. You just can't leave them. Your family needs you. Mose needs you. I need you." The bewildered woman stood staring at him. Shale hoped his words penetrated her pain and suffering and decided to take a chance. "I know you're hurting, Annika, but you don't want to shoot yourself, and I'm sure you don't want to shoot me either. Now give me that gun so we can decide what to do next." With those words, he carefully walked around the bed and walked toward his assistant, holding out his hand for the gun. She looked at him uncertainly, and the gun shook. Then she dropped her hand to her side and broke into another fit of tears. Shale reached out quickly and snatched the gun from her unmoving grip. Setting it aside on the dresser, he took the distraught girl in his arms and squeezed her tightly as she began sobbing again. Looking over his shoulder, he called out to Mose, who quickly appeared in the doorway with a frightened expression on her face. "I think she'll be all right," he reassured her, and the South African quickly ran over to them and hugged them both. After a moment, Shale gently rubbed Mosa's arm. "Didn't you tell me you sometimes have trouble sleeping?" he asked. When Mosa nodded, he continued. "Do you have any sleeping pills? A prescription?" "I have some Ambien in the medicine cabinet," she said. "Bring it and a glass of water for me," he ordered. When Mosa returned, he took the pill and the glass and held them out to Annika. She hesitated at first, but when Shale insisted, she took the pill. Taking her in his arms, Shale placed her on the bed. "Try to get some sleep, Annika," he said softly. "Everything will look better in the morning, I promise you." He kissed her forehead and then pulled the covers over her. Exhausted with hysteria, the girl closed her eyes and fell asleep after a few minutes. Shale led Mose out of the room, remembering to grab his gun. Turning off the lights and closing the door behind him, he considered the gun for a while. "Oh, shit," he exclaimed, catching his breath. The damn safety was off the whole time. When they returned to the living room, Mosa was still shaken by what had happened. "Is she going to be okay?" she asked anxiously, her eyes still red and watery. "I think so," Shale replied. "Sleep is the best thing for her. She's just completely exhausted." Mentally and emotionally exhausted by the ordeal, he sat down on the couch and leaned back in the corner. As the adrenaline began to leave his system, he suddenly felt wobbly and leaned his head back to rest. After a minute, he felt Mosa climb onto the couch. She lay down next to him and laid her head on his chest like a small child scared by a nightmare. "I was so scared," she said in a thin voice, and Shale felt new tears wet his shirt. He put his arms around her to comfort her. "I was scared too, Mosa," he admitted. Then he closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, the first thing he noticed was the light coming through the window. Startled, he pulled out his phone, and when he saw the time, he realized he had slept through the night. Carefully, trying not to wake Mose, he pulled her down off of him. Then tiptoed back to Annika's bedroom. Opening the door, he saw that she too was sound asleep. As he staggered back into the living room, a thought struck him, and he pulled out his phone again to check the calendar. "Shit," he reprimanded. "Annika has a lab paper due this morning." He walked over to the couch and gently shook the awake Mosa awake. "Mosa," he said quietly, "Annika has a lab final due today. She's still asleep and I don't want to wake her up. I'll go over and do the exam for her. No one but her students will know she wasn't there, and they won't care anyway." She sat down on the couch and looked at him intently. "You know," she said quietly, "you're a really amazing guy. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come here last night. Annika is very lucky to have a friend like that. Actually, I think we both are." Shale looked embarrassed. "Anyone else would have done the same thing," he said awkwardly. Then, seeing that Mosa was about to protest, he quickly continued. "Look, I'd better get out of here. If I hurry, I can make it home in time to get home and shower before I have to report to the geology lab. When Annika finally wakes up, try to give her something to eat. Then send me a text and let me know how she's feeling." As he was about to leave, he remembered to grab Annika's gun. "I'll take it with me, just in case," he told Mosa with a slight smile. Mose followed him to the door, and before he left, hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Shale. Thank you for being our hero." As he drove home, Shale felt good about what he had done. But when he remembered everything that had happened, he shook his head in horror. "What was I thinking? Trying to grab a loaded gun out of the hands of a hysterical woman?" he asked himself. "Sylvia won't believe what happened." As soon as he thought of Sylvia, all his marital troubles came upon him. Then a thought crossed his mind, and as he approached the traffic light, he pulled his cell phone out of his pocket and checked it. When he saw that it had no record of Sylvia's calls last night, his mood soured further. What the hell? I was out all night and she didn't even call to check on me. Didn't she know I wasn't home, or did she just not care? Once home, he quickly showered and changed his clothes. Before heading to the university, however, he looked around their apartment. No one was sleeping on the bed, and the kitchen was untouched. As far as he could tell, Sylvia wasn't there either. Where the hell was she last night? He asked himself. And what was she doing? As he watched Annika's class labor over the final lab work, the same questions echoed in his head, and resentment grew. Perhaps there was some innocent explanation for his wife's absence, but there was no way he could think of one. When the exam period was over and he had collected all the exams, he returned to his office and decided to start checking them immediately. Luckily, most of the questions were multiple choice or fill in the blank, so he figured this task wouldn't take too long. He was already halfway through the test papers when a text message from Mosa popped up on his phone. She's awake, still miserable, but calmer now. I think she'll be okay. Shale typed a confirmation and went back to his exams, greatly relieved that Annika's crisis seemed to have been averted. He had just finished grading the last exam when he heard a quiet knock on the door. Looking up, he saw Mosa's pretty face peeking out from behind the doorframe. He quickly waved a hand at her. "Is something wrong?" he asked anxiously. "No, I think Annika is fine," she replied. "I just wanted to stop by and bring you a little thank you gift." Shale started to protest, but Mosa pulled her hand out from behind her back and revealed a bag of food. "I figured you didn't have time for breakfast, and you probably haven't had lunch yet. I couldn't let you starve to death, could I?" Shale thanked her for her concern and eagerly began devouring the sandwich she had brought. While he ate, Mosa told him about Annika and her mood after waking up. "It will take some time," she concluded, "but I think she will recover. But you know what her biggest problem is right now?" When Shale looked concerned, Mosa smiled broadly. "The hardest thing for her will be meeting you again. She's ashamed to death of the way she acted and the fact that you saw her completely out of control. She really thinks well of you, and it kills her that you saw her like that." Shale was relieved that Annika was okay, but saddened by her reaction. "That's silly, Mosa. Everyone needs a friend's help from time to time. I'm glad you and I were there to help Annika when she needed it. Tell her she has no reason to be ashamed." Mosa got up to go back to the dorm to check on her roommate, but stopped at the door. "If anything, you really are a hero in my book. I think you were incredibly brave to go in there and take the gun away from Annika in her state of mind. And despite what you said, I don't think many people have a friend who would help the way you did. You're a very special guy." Before Shale could think of anything to say in response, she smiled broadly and hurried out of his office. Shale shook his head. He didn't feel like a hero, but Mosa's words still gave him a warm feeling. When he returned to his desk, his good mood quickly faded away. He may have already finished grading the exams for Annika's lab courses, but now he had to do all the exams for his own courses. Unlike the lab exam, many of the questions on his tests required essay-type answers, which took much longer. He sighed and pulled the top blue book from the stack. By the time he finished grading the exams for the first of his courses, a faint light was streaming through his office window and his stomach was rumbling again. "I might as well work on the rest at home. I can probably find something edible there," he told himself. Plus, to be honest, he wanted to see if Sylvia was back. When he got back to their apartment, Sylvia wasn't there, though Shale had seen signs that she'd been there earlier. The door to her closet had been left open, a towel thrown on the floor indicated that she had showered, and in the washing machine, he found a load of laundry that had been run in the wash. All of these things struck him as suspicious, but none of them were conclusive proof of infidelity. He sighed in frustration and went to make himself a sandwich. Then he plunged into his work. A few hours later, Shale was startled by the sound of a key in the front door lock, and he looked up to see Sylvia walking past the kitchen door, heading for the bedroom. When he headed after her, he found the bathroom door closed and heard the shower running. "Another shower?" he asked himself. That made his blood pressure go up a few notches, and he stared at the closed bathroom door in frustration. After waiting a few minutes, he gave up and went back to his studies. After a while, he looked up and saw Sylvia standing in the doorway, dressed in a robe and pajamas. "Well, well," she said wryly. "I kept wondering if you were coming home. Who did you spend the night with last night?" Caught off guard, Shale mumbled, "It wasn't like that. One of my students had a crisis and I had to help her." "And what did you do? Rob her at gunpoint?" asked Sylvia, holding out Annika's gun. "No, of course not," replied Shale. "She was dumped by her fiancé. She was going to kill herself and—" He faltered. "It's a long story." "Of course, Shale, I believe you," she said mockingly, carefully placing the gun on the tabletop. Her tone stirred up all the anger and resentment that had been building up in Sheila, and he stood up abruptly and pointed the gun at her. "Never mind me. Where have you been all night?" "Oh," she answered nonchalantly. "I worked late and fell asleep at my desk." He stared at her incredulously. "Do you really expect me to believe that?" "Believe what you want," she replied nonchalantly. That's what happened. I think you spent the night with Eric Solvay, Shale objected hotly. That's exactly what I think. She shook her head and sighed theatrically. We've been over this before, Shale, and it's getting tiresome. What made you think that? Look, Sylvia, you have to admit that things have gotten strained between us. We hardly ever see each other. You disappear all night and don't even call to let me know your whereabouts. We haven't made love in ages. Wait a minute, mister. We only made love a few days ago, or don't you remember? Well, okay, maybe, but it seemed to me that we didn't make love, but rather you threw me a bone to keep me quiet, Shale objected hotly. Sylvia folded her arms and frowned at her husband. Just listen to yourself, Shale. You say we never see each other, but you're the one who's immersed in university stuff all the time. You accuse me of not keeping in touch, but you could have tried calling me last night and telling me where you were. From my perspective, the problem is you, not me. You're having fun doing your little docent job, and you don't care at all what I want or need. In my opinion, you have the nerve to make wild accusations for which you have no evidence. She shook her head and sighed again. Now I'm tired and I'm going to go to bed. With those words, she turned on her heel and left for the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Hearing the click of the lock, Shale headed after her, intending to kick the door open. But he stopped himself and froze in the hallway in impotent anger. If Sylvia called the police and blamed him, his career would be over. That said, he understood that he hadn't imagined it, and anyone would agree that Sylvia's behavior was highly suspicious. But he also realized that she was right. He had no proof. And worse, he thought, she almost dared him to do something about it. But what could he do? He didn't have time to follow her, and there was no way he could afford to hire a private investigator. What if he hired one and found nothing? Would that prove she was innocent? He didn't believe it, but logic told him he should at least consider the possibility. He turned and walked back toward the kitchen. Seeing the stack of remaining exams, he sighed. Not today, he thought. I just can't look at them now. In frustration and exhaustion, he turned off the lights and went out into the living room to sleep on the couch. When he woke up the next morning, his body was stiff and sore. I have to stop sleeping on couches, he said bitterly to himself as he tried to stretch his stiff muscles. Returning to the bedroom, he found the door open and Sylvia gone. He shook his head. Once again, he didn't know what she was doing, where she was going, or when she would be home, if at all. I just can't go on living like this, he said to himself. He took a quick shower, got dressed, and packed up all the exams, intending to return to grade them in his office. He knew he had no choice but to finish them all today, no matter how long it took. The university had made it clear to the faculty that turning in all grades by the deadline was mandatory. Failure to do so is a serious offense that can and will be taken into account in the tenure decision. When he reached his office, he closed the door and got to work. He had been poring over the blue books for a couple hours when he heard a timid knock on the door. He sighed and said, "Come in." The door opened, and the slender figure of Mosa appeared on the threshold. I know you're on a deadline, Shale, so I won't be long. I just wanted to bring you some food. I thought you might need it. With those words, she brought a cup of coffee and a brownie from Starbucks. Shale couldn't help but laugh appreciatively. Thank you, Mosa. That's very thoughtful of you. I didn't eat breakfast, so you may have saved my life. She smiled back, then added, I also brought something else for you. When he looked at her perplexed, she retreated into the hallway and started a short conversation in a whisper. Finally, she took his hand and dragged a reluctant Annika into the small office. Shale rose hastily from his desk and held out his arms to Annika. It's so good to see you, he said. How are you feeling? The blonde grad student couldn't look Shale in the eye, so Mosa spoke up. I kind of forced her to come to you. She kept saying she was too embarrassed. Shale understood immediately. He lifted Annika's chin so he could see her face. Her eyes were still red, but they no longer had that wild expression of misery and despair that he had seen in her apartment. You have no reason to feel that way, Annika. You've had a terrible experience. Anyone could have gone mad. She raised her eyes to him, her lips trembling. In a whisper, she said, I'm so ashamed, Dr. Stevens. I can't believe I threatened you, especially when you were trying to help me. It's just that I felt so lost, so hopeless, when Robert... Again, he thought she was about to snap, so he pulled her to him and hugged her. It's going to be all right, Annika. Robert's a fool for letting you go. He'll realize it someday, but it'll be too late because you'll find someone better, someone worthy of your love. He took her by the shoulders and held her at arm's length so he could see her face again. Don't regret being hurt. How could you not be hurt? Believe me, I know what it's like to find out that someone you love has stopped caring about you. Annika cast a quick glance at Mose. The latter raised her eyebrows and nodded understandingly. I told you something was going on, the dark-haired roommate said. Then she turned to Sheila. Dr. Stevens, what's happened to you and your wife? You haven't been yourself the last few weeks, and you've dropped a few hints. What's going on, and what can we do to help? Shale let go of Annika and started to deny everything, but frustration and fatigue exhausted him, and he suddenly found himself laying out the whole story to both women. As all his suspicions and anguish poured out, both women exchanged concerned looks. When he finally stopped, Annika took the opportunity to ask, What happened that morning when you came into the office and were so cheerful? I thought things had gotten better for you. Her question confused him, but Shale had gone so far that now he felt like he couldn't hold anything back. I guess that morning I really did think we had things worked out. The day before was the first time we'd done it in a long time. I thought it was weird, but... At this point, Mosa snorted. She made him feel good. Annika laughed out loud. It's a classic, she said. What are you talking about? Asked Shale in confusion. Both women looked at each other, and Mosa spoke first. It's something we girls talk about in the dorm. It's a way to deal with a date you don't really like, or one that gets too aggressive. Of course, Annika said. All a girl has to do is make the guy feel good. Then men's brains shut down. Shale's anger returned in full force, not only at his wife, but at himself for being so easily deceived. He looked disappointedly at the two young women. What's really killing me is that there's no way I can figure out what's going on with her. The way she's acting leads me to believe she's having an affair with her boss, but she denies it, and I have no way to prove it. And until I can do that, there's always an element of doubt. It's driving me crazy. Couldn't you hire a private detective to follow her and take pictures? Asked Mosa. Those guys cost a fortune, replied Shale dismissively. Besides, if she's doing something on campus, a stranger won't be able to find her anyway. I'd rather follow her myself, but I have so much work to do that I can't find the time. Annika and Mosa exchanged glances, and then Annika excitedly said, Let's do it. Mosa and I know what Sylvia looks like, and we know this campus like the back of our hands. Next time you think something's going on, we'll be your detectives. No, absolutely not, declared Shale emphatically. I'm not going to get you too involved in my business. Besides, if the wrong people see you and start asking questions, it could cause problems for both of you. Okay, then how about this? Suggested Mosa. We won't break into buildings or eavesdrop at keyholes. We'll just keep an eye on her, see where she goes, and let you know. At least that way you'll know where to look if you want to check out what she's up to. Please, Annika pleaded. You've done so much for me. Let Mosa and I do something for you. I don't know, Shale said. I'm still thinking. At that moment, his phone beeped for an incoming message. When he read it, his face darkened. He lifted the phone so they could both see Sylvia's message. Don't wait up for me 2 nights. She's doing it again, he said angrily. We're only 3 days away from graduation. What could she possibly have that makes her work late? He stared at Mose and Annika, disappointment reflected on his face. Okay, if you really want to play detectives, follow her while I finish grading exams. When I'm done, I'll call you and fill in for her. I have to get to the bottom of this, but I'll be the one taking the risk, not you two. Deal, said Mosa, and to Shale's surprise, the two of them leaned over and kissed him on the cheeks. Now get back to your exams, Professor, Annika admonished him, and leave the detecting in our safe hands. The two women left, chatting animatedly about what they needed to do to find Sylvia and follow her. Turning back to his stack of exams, Shale wondered if he was making a mistake by involving the two women. At least it will take Annika's mind off her problems, he reasoned. It was already dark by the time Shale finished all his exams and entered the grades into the university's online system. After making sure he had done everything necessary, he picked up his phone and sent Annika a text. "What's up? Where are you?" A minute later, the phone rang. It was Mosa. "We're outside Elliott Hall. She just went inside." "I'm done. I'll be right there," he told her. Elliott Hall was the university's administrative building. The gray building, built in the classic Roman style, was 3 stories high. Shale found Annika and Moz waiting for him under a huge maple tree on the front lawn. We'd been watching her all day, and everything she did seemed quite innocent. Then, just recently, she went outside to make a cell phone call. I couldn't get close enough to overhear her, but she seemed to perk up when she was done. She headed straight for Elliott's, at which point you rang the bell. We didn't follow her inside because we figured a couple of students walking around the lobby would look out of place, Mosa apologized. "Look, you did good," Shale reassured her. "You two go home and I'll take it from here." Annika nodded, but Mosa grabbed Shale's arm. "You're not going to do anything crazy, are you?" He smiled grimly. "I'm not here for revenge, only to find out the truth." Seeing that she didn't calm down, he added, "I'll call you later and let you know what I found." She reluctantly let him go, and both young women headed across campus toward the graduate student dormitory, looking back at him apprehensively. Shale boldly walked up the marble steps to the front entrance. Once in the lobby, he looked around and, seeing no one, headed for the stairs rather than the elevator. He was familiar enough with the layout of the building to know that the provost's office was in one wing of the top floor and the president's office in the other. If Sylvia was there with the provost, he didn't want the sound of the elevator to alert them. Reaching the 3rd floor, he poked his head out of the stairwell and checked to see if anyone else was around. The corridor was empty, so he tiptoed to the door to the provost's suite, careful not to make any noise on the marble floor. When he leaned against the door to the reception area, it opened easily to his surprise. Looking inside, he saw that no one was working behind the counter. He hesitated, unsure of what to do next, when he heard a woman moaning from behind a door with a brass plate reading, "Provost's Office." He strode silently across the carpeted floor and pressed his ear against the door, trying to determine exactly what was going on inside. He heard the woman's moan again, followed by a grunting sound accompanied by the slap of flesh against flesh. Anger flared up in Sheila, and he started to press his shoulder against the door to rush inside, intending to catch his wife and her boss in the act. But he remembered his promise to Mose, and instead opened the door wide enough to peek inside. As he expected, the provost was pouncing vigorously on Sylvia, who was lying face down on his desk, her long brown hair covering her face. Solvay's eyes were closed as he straddled her hips and thrust into her with such force that the table shook. His grunts sounded to Shale like the sounds a wild boar might make, but it was obvious that Solvay was enjoying every second of it. Taking a risk, Shale pulled out his smartphone and set it to video. "Now I have proof," he thought bitterly, as he opened the door a little more and started recording. As he watched, the provost reached down and grabbed Sylvia by the hair, throwing her head back. But something was wrong, because Shale suddenly realized that the provost's mistress wasn't Sylvia at all. For a moment he was confused, and then he drew back sharply, suppressing a sigh. Now he knew who the woman was. It was Perry's wife, Camilla. He carefully closed the door so that no sound could be heard, and stepped back. What he witnessed not only surprised him, but left him utterly confused. If Solvay is having an affair with Camilla, then perhaps Sylvia has been telling the truth all along. But even as he felt the prick of doubt, he remembered his wife's dismissive attitude and her inexplicable absences. I couldn't have imagined all this. What the hell is going on? He wondered, slipping out of the provost's suite and into the hallway. He was standing still, trying to decide what to do next, when he heard the sound of the elevator rising. Panic gripped him. He knew he had to act if he didn't want to get caught. Shale quickly rushed down the hallway in the other direction, not wanting Solveig and Camille to find him if they happened to come out. Then he heard the sound of footsteps heading in his direction, and when he heard Sylvia's distinct laughter, he realized he needed to hide. Furious, he began trying different doors, looking for an unlocked one. Finding a door without a handle at the end of the hallway, he pushed it open in desperation and was relieved when it opened. Slipping into the darkened room, he closed the door and listened carefully, trying to determine where Sylvia and her companion had gone. As he waited, he looked around, trying to figure out where he had hidden himself. At the other end of the room, light was coming through a vent at the bottom of another door, and as his eyes adjusted to the semi-darkness, he realized he was in a luxuriously furnished bathroom. This must be the president's private restroom, he thought irreverently. And then he heard Sylvia's voice again, this time accompanied by the unmistakable tones of Magnus Jefferson. The sound came from the study beyond his hiding place. Shale tiptoed to the door and knelt to peer through the bars. He almost choked when he saw Sylvia. "I'm so disappointed," she was saying. "I thought we were going to spend the whole evening together." "God knows I'd love to, but I have a meeting I have to attend," he said in his deep voice. "At least let me make it quick," Shale heard her pleading. "Very well," he said, "but you'll have to leave in 10 minutes, so I have time to get ready." 10 minutes is all I need," she said hoarsely. With those words, she began to entertain him. Shale's fleeting hope that Sylvia might actually be faithful had long since faded away, but when he learned the truth, he still became furious. "How long can I give her the benefit of the doubt?" he thought bitterly. He grabbed the phone again and started recording through the blinds, knowing that this time Sylvia wouldn't be able to lie. When Sylvia left, Shale was tempted to leave, but he decided it would be wiser to wait until Jefferson left for his meeting. Just as long as he doesn't need to use the restroom, he thought fervently. But no sooner had he gotten up to stretch his aching knees than he heard a new female voice say, "Well, Magnus, I hope you enjoyed yourself." Shocked, Shale peered through the vent again and saw Margaret Jefferson enter the office through another door. He was even more startled to hear Jefferson's reply. "Certainly enjoyed it, my dear." Mrs. Jefferson sat down in the chair by her husband's desk. "I must admit, she's a lovely little thing." She looked shrewdly at her husband. "You know she's in love with you, don't you?" "Of course," he said with a laugh. Margaret looked at him sharply. "Just watch you don't fall in love with her." Magnus laughed again. "Well, well, well, my dear, you know best. Besides, I'll never leave you." She didn't calm down. "You'd better not if you want to keep my father's support and donations." "Don't be boring, Margaret. I know what I'm doing. For your information, I'm almost done with the lovely Sylvia. I plan to break up with her right after graduation." Jefferson glanced at the ornate clock on his Chippendale-style desk and stood up abruptly. "We're going to be late, dear." The two of them walked quickly out of the study, and Shale rose to his feet with a groan. But the pain in his knees was nothing compared to the pain he felt from the bitter turn his life had taken. Once outside the building, he grabbed his phone again and called Annika. "What's wrong, Shale? What did you find out?" she asked worriedly. "Is it okay if I crash at your place tonight?" he replied in a low voice. "I wouldn't want to go home." "Oh, Shale, I'm so sorry," she said. After spending another night on the couch, Shale went to his office and looked up the name of a local attorney who could handle his divorce. Now that he knew the truth about Sylvia, there was no way he could stay with her. Fortunately, he was able to make a quick appointment. After listening to the situation and considering various considerations, the attorney promised that the necessary papers would be filed the following week. She also gave Shale some advice on how to protect himself financially, and Shale spent the next few hours opening a new bank account, transferring funds from their joint account, canceling joint credit cards, and making the necessary insurance changes. It felt good to take action, but the shadow of failure loomed over everything. His marriage had failed, and his life as he envisioned it was about to end. Finished unraveling everything he could for the day, he returned to his office because he had one last thing to do before he went home to meet Sylvia. Finishing his work, he started to get ready to go home, but Perry Ryan suddenly came out of his office and called out to him. "Hey, Shale, did you turn in all your grades on time?" Shale sighed. He had hoped not to run into Perry, so he wouldn't interfere with their marriage. But now, finding himself face to face with the man, Shale decided he had no choice. "I guess if I'm really his friend, I owe it to him to tell him about this," he thought as he entered Perry's office and closed the door. "What happened?" asked Perry, surprised at Shale's solemn demeanor. "Perry, I was in Eric Solvay's office last night," began Shale. "And how is the provost doing?" Perry asked nonchalantly, but Shale thought something strange flashed in Perry's eyes. "Perry, I don't know how to put this any better, so I'll say it bluntly. Solvay and Camille are having an affair." His coworker just stared at him, and Shale was surprised at his lack of response. "Perry, I know this will shock you. You probably don't even believe me. But they didn't know I was there, and I managed to get a video of them. I can show it to you if you want." Perry began to rub his mouth, looking anxiously at Shale. After a long moment of thought, he said quietly, "No, I don't want to see the video, Shale. I know about the affair. I've known about it since it started." Now Shale was shocked. "You knew about it, and you didn't do anything about it? What kind of a husband are you?" Fire flashed in Perry's eyes, and for a moment, Shale thought he was about to pounce on his desk. Then the fire subsided, and he sank into a chair. "Shale, Camille and I have $723 in our bank account. The two of us owe almost $150,000 in student loans. By the time I make my monthly loan payment, pay my rent, and put money down on my car payment, there's almost nothing left of my paycheck. Camille has a PhD, so you'd think she could bring in enough money to help us get by. But as an adjunct professor, she only makes a few $1,000s for each course she teaches. And this semester, the university only gave her one course. So when Eric Solvay came to Camille and offered to take her on full-time next year in exchange for her personal services, what do you think we did? I hated it, but I agreed because we had no other choice." He stared at his desk, ashamed to look Sheila in the eye. "Camille hates it too. She says Solvay is a lousy lover, but she's doing it for us." Shale remembered the scene he'd glimpsed through the door of the provost's office. Judging from the moans of ecstasy he'd heard and the way she'd responded, he didn't think Camille was acting, but he kept his opinion to himself. "I can only imagine what you think of me, and Camille too, for that matter," Perry continued. "I understand how life can take a person to a place where there are no good options," Shale told him. "All I can do is hope things work out for the best for you two." He started to walk away, but then turned around. "And don't worry, I won't share what you told me with anyone." As Shale walked across campus to his parking spot, he felt a slight queasiness in his stomach. "There are no good options in my life either," he thought to himself. "But I'll never be able to prostitute my wife no matter how difficult the situation. Of course, I won't have a wife soon, so I won't have to face this problem," he thought bitterly. By the time he reached their house, it was late evening. As he walked up to the door, he realized that he would have to move out soon. The apartment was too big and expensive for him to live there alone. Not surprisingly, Sylvia wasn't home, and Shale started rummaging through the refrigerator for something to eat. There was almost nothing in the fridge, and finally he decided to make scrambled eggs from the 2 remaining eggs. After eating a meager portion of scrambled eggs and toast, washing them down with the remains of an old bottle of wine, he sat down on the couch and prepared to wait. He figured she'd probably gone home because the university calendar indicated that President Jefferson would be speaking at a fundraiser, and Shale was sure it would be his wife, not Sylvia, who would be with Magnus. Nevertheless, he was startled when the key turned in the lock and Sylvia entered the house. She, in turn, seemed equally surprised to see Shale sitting there, but quickly recovered. "I see the prodigal son has come home," she said sarcastically. I don't want to cross swords with you, Sylvia. Not now. I'm here because I want to personally inform you that I'm filing for divorce. You'll probably be served with the papers early next week. She walked over to a chair at the other end of the room and sat down. And what prompted you to take such a drastic step? She asked coldly, sitting down. Shale looked at her with a level gaze. No more games, Sylvia. I'm divorcing you because you're having an affair with Magnus Jefferson. To his surprise, she let out a contemptuous chuckle. You're really something, you know that? First I have an affair with the provost. Now you think I'm having an affair with the president. Do you realize how crazy that sounds, Shale? I was in President Jefferson's office last night. I saw the two of you together. That's impossible, she snapped back. You made the whole thing up. Instead of answering, he walked over to the TV and turned it on, along with the DVD player. Then he pressed the remote, and suddenly a video of her having fun appeared on the screen. At first, Sylvia just stared at the screen in surprise. When she realized what she was seeing, her face turned pale. But when Shale stopped the video, she began to act defiant. Aren't you a tough detective? She grinned. You're proud of yourself. No, he said. Now I'm just curious. What's the matter, Sylvia? I thought we had a good marriage. I thought we had the same goals and dreams. How did we get to this point? He asked, pointing to the frozen image of Sylvia. Do you really want to know? She asked, her face contorted with anger. Everything changed when I started working for Eric. It didn't take me long to realize that the people in the administration looked down on the teachers. He made fun of their quirks, petty rivalries, and obsession with things that don't matter in the real world. To people in the administration, faculty members are nothing more than spoiled, overeducated people. When I started working at Magnus, I started meeting the real movers and shakers. Billionaire donors who fund the university, captains of industry who offer big research grants, government officials who need advice. These are the kind of people Magnus talks to every day while you're stuck in a dusty lab teaching bored students the difference between sedimentary and igneous rocks. Worse, I realize that you're enjoying all this, that you'll be content to bury yourself for the rest of your life. The closer I worked with Magnus, the more I admired his drive, ambition, and influence. When we became lovers, I saw a way out of your pathetic world into something much bigger and better. Shale looked at her as if she were some unknown specimen under a microscope. Was this really the woman he had married? Had all this jealousy and insecurity he was now seeing been here all along, or had it only manifested itself since they'd arrived at the university? I guess it doesn't matter either way, he thought sadly. She shrugged dismissively. If you want to file for divorce, be my guest. You'll just save me from having to do it myself. All it means is that Magnus and I can be together much sooner. He plans to leave his wife right after graduation, and as soon as the divorce is finalized, I'll be Mrs. Magnus Jefferson. He stared at her for a moment. Then, in an even voice, he said, There is something else you need to see. With those words, he pressed the play button again, and now Margaret Jefferson's voice came from the speakers. Shale didn't even look at the screen. Instead, he watched Sylvia's face intently. At first, a look of disbelief appeared on Sylvia's face as she saw and heard the conversation that had taken place after she had left the president's office. As she listened to Jefferson's words, Shale saw her confidence crumble and shock build in her eyes. When the video stopped abruptly, the remnants of her composure disintegrated, and she began to sob. Shale stood up, ignoring her tears. I'm leaving now. You can stay here tonight, but you'll have to be gone by the time graduation is over. I don't know where you'll go. That's not my problem. He picked up the bag he'd packed and started to head for the door, but then stopped. I wouldn't recommend trying to get into the president's mansion, though, he said bitterly. As he was heading out the door, Sylvia shrieked. Shale drove back to the graduate student dormitory. When he knocked on the door, Mosa answered quickly and hugged him as he entered. How did it go? She asked sympathetically. Bad, as well as could be expected, he replied. Saturday morning was graduation day. There was a joke going around among the faculty that the only valid excuse for missing graduation was a dead bell. Shale didn't want his hopes of getting tenure to take a hit, so he reluctantly donned the requisite academic regalia. Wearing the golden yellow cape over the black robe that denoted science made him feel like a grotesque bumblebee, but in such matters tradition outweighed taste. When he arrived at the university, the large quadrangle was filled with rows of folding chairs arranged in front of a large platform erected for professors and speakers. Looking up the steep steps leading to the stage, Shale could only hope that none of the newly minted graduates had been hurt trying to climb the final barrier to a diploma. The weather was beautiful, and the quadrangle was quickly filling up with friends and families. A small platform had been erected in the middle of the crowd, on which a videographer was positioned to keep a continuous record of the entire ceremony. A photographer wandered nearby, snapping shots for the university website. Even in his somber mood, the spectacle still impressed Shale. When pomp and circumference finally sounded, the faculty marched up to the stage and took their seats. Shale noticed Perry sitting a few seats away from him, but he steadfastly refused to look in his direction. The graduating classes followed, filling their assigned rows in front of the stage. When everyone finally took their seats, President Jefferson rose to begin the ceremony. Despite his disdain for the man, Shale couldn't help but admire how deftly the president wove tradition and formality with light humor in his opening remarks. "That bastard would make a pretty good political candidate," he admitted. "Heck, it's probably already in his master plan," he thought. The president went on to launch into a lengthy metaphor about the contract between student and university. "Today, the students before us have fulfilled their part of the contract by completing their degree requirements, and we, the faculty and administration, have fulfilled our promise by providing a world-class education," he implored, pausing to emphasize his point. During that pause, a shrill voice close enough to the podium to be picked up by the microphone shouted, "You're lying!" Someone in the crowd chuckled, and Jefferson looked around in amazement, unable to believe that someone had dared to interrupt him. Hastily looking around, he didn't find the source of that shout and tried to continue. "As I was saying—" "You're lying," came the shout again. "You haven't kept the promise you made to me." People on the stage and in the audience began to rise and crane their necks, trying to see what was happening. Jefferson turned his head again, and this time his gaze stopped on the photographer who was standing on the stage taking pictures. Shale peeked between his two fellow professors to get a better look at what was going on and sighed. "That's Sylvia," he realized with amazement. She was dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt with her long hair tucked underneath, and holding the camera in front of her face. Neither Magnus nor Shale recognized her. While the president stared at her in shock, she stood up and walked over to him. When she pulled the hood off her head, he too gasped as he recognized her. "Sylvia, what are you doing? This isn't the time or place," he began in a low voice, but the microphone caught every word. With a scream of rage, Sylvia raised the camera above her head and smashed it against the floor of the platform. The lens shattered and rolled across the stage, and the crackling sound echoed through the speaker system. The audience held its breath. "I will not be thrown away like an unwanted toy!" Sylvia shouted. At the beginning of the ceremony, the campus police had stood on the outskirts of the crowd. Now Shale noticed several of them trying to make their way toward the stage, but the aisles clogged with spectators were in their way. One of the officers managed to get closer to the stage, but Sylvia spotted him. She quickly reached into the camera bag hanging on her shoulder and pulled out a gun. "That's Annika's gun!" realized Shale with horror. He had completely forgotten about it. "Get back!" shouted Sylvia to the policeman. "Don't try to stop me. I'll have my say." The spectators at the rear of the quadrangle could not see what was happening, but those nearer the stage did, and the shouts of, "She's got a gun!" reached them. Like a wave receding from the shore, the crowd swept away from the stage. Sylvia pointed the gun toward Jefferson, turning toward the audience. "He lied to me. He promised me he'd leave his wife. He said he would marry me," she shouted in a wild voice. Jefferson stood as if paralyzed, grasping the podium for support. the crowd quieted a bit, trying to hear what was being said. Hundreds of cell phones were raised up, and spectators were trying to capture the spectacle happening before their eyes. Suddenly, to everyone's amazement, a female professor stood up, tears streaming down her face, and screamed, "He promised to marry me too!" Sylvia raised her head in surprise until she noticed the woman who had spoken. Then another female teacher jumped to her feet. "He promised me I'd get tenure if I slept with him," she shouted angrily, pointing an accusing finger at Jefferson. Then a young woman sitting among the graduates pulled herself up in her chair. "He promised me he'd write off my student loans," she shouted. The crowd gasped with each outburst, mesmerized by the drama unfolding before them and wondering what would happen next. As each new voice joined the other accusers, Silva swiveled her head back and forth as if watching some bizarre tennis match. Now she turned to face Jefferson again. "You bastard!" she shouted. "You lied to all of us!" Jefferson held out his arms to her and took a step in her direction. "You have to let me explain, Sylvia. Things are not what they seem." "Stand back!" she shouted, gesturing furiously with the gun. The gun went off with a tremendous rattle that echoed throughout the quadrangle, amplified by the speaker system. Instantly, screams erupted and people rushed for cover. Jefferson froze for a moment with a shocked expression on his face. Then he reached down and touched the chest of his academic robe. As his fingers turned crimson, his face took on an expression of confusion, and then he slowly lowered himself onto the platform. Amidst all this chaos, Shale tried to make his way to the podium. The voice inside him kept urging him to run like the others, but a sense of responsibility kept him moving forward. "I have to try to stop this," he thought, stepping toward Sylvia. She was leaning over Jefferson's body. "What have I done?" she cried to herself. "Sylvia!" shouted Shale, and the woman looked back at him over her shoulder in confusion. Then she saw the security officer climbing the stairs on the other side of the platform. She glanced at Shale once more with an expression of resignation, then turned back to Jefferson. When Shale reached out to grab her, she pointed the barrel at Annika and pulled the trigger. The story took over the media for weeks. The first shooting and the panic it caused was sensational enough, but as the investigation progressed, the story got uglier and uglier. Not only was Magnus Jefferson engaging in inappropriate relationships with university staff and students, but his wife, it soon became clear, was as well. Worse, many of these relationships were instigated by offers of money or favors, and some by threats of reprisal. It then emerged that Eric Solvay, the provost, was acting as an agent of sorts on campus, identifying potential victims and referring them to Jefferson or exploiting them himself. This apparently continued for several years. Equally horrifying was the revelation that other members of the administration knew what was happening and did nothing about it. Desperate to save its reputation, the university demanded the resignation of virtually all of the top members of the administration. The trustees held a meeting and subsequently apologized on behalf of the institution. They also decided that Elliott Hall, the site where such actions had taken place, should be demolished and another facility chosen as the administration building. Of course, none of these measures helped to contain the scandal. The photo of the student standing on the chair became a meme. Headline writers endlessly repeated the words president, provost, and predator. The university eventually dropped those titles and switched to provost and vice chancellor for operations. Knowing that a lengthy legal battle could leave the disaster in the public eye for years to come, the university quickly established a special fund for victims' claims. Funding for the fund put the university's multi-billion-dollar endowment in jeopardy. Shale's attorney was able to negotiate a special settlement with his employer. In exchange for a seven-figure sum, the university bought out Scheele's contract, and he agreed to leave the school. Shale couldn't blame them for not wanting him around. He would be a constant reminder of that horrible episode. Plus, he didn't want to be a constant source of whispers and jokes on campus. Shale had also filed a lawsuit against Eric Solvay, but his lawyer had advised him not to pursue the case. "It's not worth it," she told him. "There are several lawsuits filed against Solvay, and he has vowed to fight each of them to a victorious conclusion. A long trial will cost you a lot of money, And when it's over, you'll get nothing because Solveig's legal fees will make him a pauper. I understand what you're saying, Shale replied angrily, but it annoys the hell out of me. Besides, I wanted to call him as a witness and find out what really happened between him and Sylvia. Find out how all this shit started. The lawyer looked at him shrewdly. If you want the truth, I think I know how you can get it. A few weeks later, Shale sat in the conference room of the law firm representing Eric Solvay. In exchange for an ironclad agreement to drop the lawsuit against Solvay and to never divulge anything said at the conference, Shale was given an hour to question the former provost. He, in turn, agreed to answer Shale's questions honestly. Sitting at the wide wooden table across from his nemesis, Shale noted with satisfaction how old and shabby the former provost looked. He answered Shale's questions in a tired voice, devoid of hope. Shale didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. When Shale asked him how it had started, Solvay told him that the first time he had succumbed to temptation was when one of the doctoral students offered him entertainment in exchange for a scholarship. After that experience, Solvay realized how much leverage he had over others, and when the next pretty victim came to him, he didn't wait for her to make him an offer. When he laid out the nature of the proposal, she didn't even object. Everything went smoothly until that evening when Magnus Jefferson unexpectedly entered Eric's office and caught him in the act with an adjunct. After the embarrassed girl fled, Solvay told Shield that he expected to be fired on the spot. Jefferson demanded to be told everything about Solvay's adventures. When he finished, the president shocked Eric by saying that he wanted in on the game. But hasn't anyone ever refused or threatened to tell anyone? Asked Shale. Solvay looked at him like he was an idiot. Who would take the word of an academically inept academic over the president of a university? He asked contemptuously. Besides, these people were desperate, and we had what they needed: degrees, seniority, scholarships, and all that. No one turned us down. What's more, many of them decided it was a fair trade. Shale couldn't help but curl his lips in contempt. But he had one more question to ask. What I really want to know is, what leverage did you have over Sylvia? How did you get her to become Jefferson's mistress? Solvay shook her head. We didn't have to offer her anything. She came to him on her own. Shale could only stare at Solvay and clench his fists. He wanted to know the truth, and now he had it. Was he satisfied? No, but the two people he was most angry with were out of his reach. He decided he cared nothing for the man sitting across from him. Solvay had nothing but a shameful and miserable life ahead of her. Without another word, Shale pushed his chair away from the table and left the room. It was time to forget about it. A few days later, Perry Ryan found Shale vacating his office. So you're really leaving, he said. I thought with the change in administration you'd be staying. No, Shale said. The university wanted me to leave and paid me well for it. Frankly, I'm glad to leave too. Too many bad memories. What about you, Perry? What are your plans? I'm going to stay. Camille and I paid off all our student loans, so life is a lot easier now. Shale looked at him with the corner of his eye as he continued packing. What about your marriage? Are you going to be okay after everything that happened? Perry answered quickly. Sure, it's all in the past now. Things are fine between me and Camille. A memory of the last time he had seen Camille flashed through Shale's mind, but he suppressed the image. Good, Perry. I'm glad to hear that, he said. So, have you found a new position at another university? Continued Perry. No, Shale said. I'm not in demand at the big universities. And to tell you the truth, I don't think I'd accept if one of them offered me a contract. I've had enough academia for a lifetime. So you're just going to leave and lead an idle lifestyle, are you? No, I'm going to continue my research. I plan to use the money from the settlement to fund my own geologic expedition. Perry looked at him curiously, and Shale pulled a bound copy of his dissertation from the box he'd packed it in. Remember my hypothesis about variations in the forces that formed the continents? Those variations help explain why different kinds of rocks and minerals are unevenly distributed around the globe. Of course I remember, Perry said. So? Shale smiled. In the past, people stumbled upon ores and mineral deposits more or less by accident. But I think I can use my theory to predict where to look for some valuable minerals that people haven't tried yet. Perry looked at him skeptically. Are you going to look for gold? No, but something equally valuable. Europium. Europium is the rare earth element that gives television screens and computer monitors their red color. It has many other possible uses, but it is rare and only found in such small concentrations that it requires serious processing to extract it. At the moment, the largest known deposits are in China. But if my hypothesis is correct, I think I can find a new source of europium ore, with much higher concentrations of the element. Sounds like digging for gold to me anyway, Perry said with a smile. And how long do you think you'll be away? I plan to spend 6 months there, Shale told him. The other man shook his head doubtfully. Well, I wish you luck, but I wouldn't want to take on something like that. It sounds like a hard and lonely existence to me. Shale smiled. Oh, I don't think I'd be too lonely. Shale carefully made his way down the ledge of the cliff. The moon illuminated him well, but he didn't want to step on a rickety rock, or worse, one of the venomous reptiles that came out to hunt after the sun's warmth subsided. I was finally able to catch a signal, he said, as he reached the campfire. There's a helicopter picking us up in the morning to take us to the next range. Oh, he added. I also got a message from Annika. She's back from her honeymoon and wanted to wish us all the best. He sighed and looked at Moss. I still think she made a terrible mistake going back to Robert. I don't understand how she can trust him after what he did. Mosa shrugged. I agree, but love makes people do crazy things. Hearing that, Shale couldn't help but think back to the last year of his life with Sylvia. Mosa saw his reaction and immediately realized what he was thinking. She quickly walked over to him. Oh, Shale, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to bring up. No, it's okay. Shale put his arm around her waist. Every now and then something reminds me of the bad times, but it doesn't happen very often now. Honestly, right now I'm happy. The girl pulled him closer to her and asked reproachfully, And what makes you so happy, Professor Stevens? He smiled at her. First of all, I'm very happy to be here with you, Mosa chuckled. And secondly, I'm happy to be as far away from the ivy-covered walls as possible. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.